waiting for a few more people to join us, and we will kick off. As we're doing that, do let us know in the chat where you're calling in from, please. So you can just say which country or city you are in. And I'll give it 30 more seconds, and then we'll start. Okay, great. So I'm going to kick off. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. As I suspect we have a few persons from all over the world joining us today, which I think is excellent. Welcome to day one of our 4-day OneWISH Stress Awareness Week event, creating psychologically safe and healthy workplaces. My name is Melissa Mark Joyce, and I'm a proud executive committee member of OneWISH, the global coalition of organizations, including corporates, membership bodies, not-for-profits, and women's networks, coming together to provide leadership and focus to improve the prominence and influence of women in the health and safety sector. We want to see more women in leadership positions, and we know that wouldn't happen without collective action. We have a great lineup of inspirational and insightful presentations, panel discussions, and sessions planned over the next 4 days. We have evolved our program from last year to ensure we are able to offer a wider range of topics, but also spread the event over 4 days at different times to allow our global membership more options to attend. Before I introduce Malcolm to kick off our week's events, I wanted to remind everyone of the week's schedule. So today we'll be hearing from OneWISH co-founder Malcolm Staves, followed by our keynote session with Dr. David Daniels on the topic Inclusive Leadership for Inclusive Culture. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. London time, I'll be having a fireside chat with Lame Vere on the topic Barriers Faced by Women in Middle Management. This will be followed at 4 p.m. with Rosa Carrillo, who will be speaking about stress factors and inclusion in health and safety. On Wednesday, we'll be kicking off early as we have an exciting panel discussion with Peter Kelly, Joelle Mitchell, and Louise Hoskin on the topic of the global recognition of ISO 45003. This is not one to be missed, as I'm sure we'll all like to learn more about managing psychosocial risk in a post-pandemic world. And then on our last day on Thursday, we'll be kicking off at 9 a.m. with Karen McDonald and Anne Demet, who will be joined by several inspirational women for another panel discussion titled Where Mentoring Fits in Improving Health and Well-Being. This will be followed by a lunchtime session at 1 p.m. with Heather Beach entitled Managing Stress and Burnout in an Uncertain World. And then at 2 p.m., our other co-founder, Louise Hoskin, will close the event. So indeed, a great lineup. We look forward to you joining as many sessions live to engage in the discussions and to be part of the Q&As. During the presentations and discussions, you will have the opportunity to post questions in the chat, and we'll cover them during the Q&A portions of the sessions. Please interact on the chat and post your questions. We're also streaming live on LinkedIn and YouTube, so we'll be monitoring those media channels as well for comments, questions, etc. So really looking forward to a wide remit of conversations. So with that, let's officially kick off our OneWISH Stress Awareness Week by welcoming our co-founder, Malcolm Staves. Malcolm needs no introduction, but I am going to say a little bit about him. So Malcolm is the Global VP of Health and Safety for L'Oreal, and as I said, co-founder of OneWISH. Malcolm is active globally in raising the profile and of the role of health and safety within the human capital agenda and with associated stakeholders. You can see Malcolm a lot on LinkedIn, sharing his thoughts and passion for health and safety. Malcolm is a current occupational health and safety expert partner to the Capitals Coalition and is spearheading putting people back into the sustainability putting people back into sustainability through raising the profile of why health, safety, and well-being is vital to the ESG and sustainability agendas. Malcolm's approach is based on 3 pillars of risk management, excellence, and beyond. He believes in the deployment of the right tool at the right time, visible felt leadership at all levels, and that sustained health and safety performance is a result of the culture. And on a personal note, Malcolm is a great guide and mentor for me, and I am sure many others on this call, as well as members of the OneWISH family. I am really fortunate to know Malcolm and to be part of the OneWISH group that he has co-founded. So enough from me. I want to welcome Malcolm, so I'll hand over to Malcolm. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Melissa. I don't really know what to say from that. That's absolutely superb. I've been asked a lot of questions by a lot of people about how did OneWISH actually come into being? And I think I'd like to spend a little bit of time actually talking about that and how Louise Hoskin, who I think is on the call. Louise, if you're there, just say hello to everybody in the chat if you've not done already. And how we founded OneWISH. So Louise and I first met at a conference in the United Kingdom, even though I'm actually based in Paris. I live in France, where I'd actually presented the L'Oreal Safe at Work, Safe at Home program, where we're trying to export our health and safety and well-being culture into our families, into local communities, and also into other companies. And then at that time, Louise was actually working with a local school just outside of London on STEMs. And we just got talking and we decided that maybe there was something that we could do under our Safe at Work, Safe at Home program that would align with what Louise was doing with the school. And then COVID came, and unfortunately, everything was put on hold and it didn't seem to be the right thing to do. And at the same time, within L'Oreal, where, as you know, I work, we were starting to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion within our health and safety professionals. And so we set up a program called Women in Health and Safety within L'Oreal. And at that same time, Louise and I were talking, and all of a sudden we realized that we actually knew a lot of people globally that have women in safety networks, but they work in isolation within the countries. And that maybe, just maybe, we could bring them together and start supporting each other, supporting our events, and maybe create a network of women working in health and safety. So we reached out to our friends, our colleagues, our acquaintances across the world, and bit by bit, we found that there was interest. So we co-founded OneWISH, bringing them all together. And today, like Melissa just described, the idea is to support women working in health and safety, give them a platform to talk together, to be mentored, to support events that we do. At the same time, L'Oreal, back in 2017-18, we created a partnership under Safe at Work, Safe at Home with the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, ROSPA. And it seemed clear that maybe through ROSPA and the OneWISH Alliance, we could create something that would help mentor women working in health and safety to allow them to go to the next level. So what we did, we've created a program whereby there are 32 women annually that go through a training program one day with Louise on leading safely, followed by 10 to 12 months of one-to-one mentoring with a professional, typically that works in occupational health and safety. And that professional is tailored to obviously to the individual. And we have people on this train that have come from America, the UK, France, Spain, as well as other countries around the world. So it's actually been quite a success from what we've been doing at OneWISH. Now, today and over the next few days, we're going to be talking about stress. We're going to be talking about psychological safe and healthy workplaces. And I'll be perfectly honest with you all, I'm on a journey myself. If you'd have spoken to me about mental health, stress, or even psychological safety 5-6 years ago, I would not have thought that it would have been part of a health and safety remit. However, bit by bit, with the event of COVID and the impact on COVID, I've realized that what we do within health and safety is protect people. We're all about reducing the number of injuries, the number of illnesses, etc. So even though we may never be experts in stress management, like, for example, we're not going to be psychiatrists or maybe not psychologists, or maybe out there are some people that work in health and safety like I do. But it becomes important that we understand what our contribution is in this area. Now, from what I can gather, and I've looked into this in a little bit further over the last few months, there's 15% apparently, according to the ILO, of working adults experience a mental health disorder every year. That's a lot of people. There's also ILO estimate that 972 million there are 972 million mental health incidents per year globally, and that's probably an underestimation. Now, the impact on that on work has got to be tremendous. And I don't know personally what the impact is. Maybe somebody out there knows and could put it in the chat. But how, as a health and safety professional, can we not start to deal with this, even though we may not have all the solutions? For example, where I work, we have lots of different departments that have staff with a lot of people, like we have diversity and equity and inclusion department, we have an ethics department, we have HR departments, we have environmental health and safety that now has well-being. And so we need, within L'Oreal, we need to work together, and it's not one department that has the solution or should necessarily hold the burden of driving stress management, mental health throughout an organization. Within L'Oreal, it's HR that drive mental health in collaboration with health and safety. When it comes to general well-being, outside of that, it's actually health and safety, so it's a little bit more complex. But I'm a great believer that when it comes to psychological safety, which is also what we're going to be talking about over these next few days, that it's all part of business culture. And I think Rosa will go into more detail about this, but it's important that we as health and safety professionals understand the role we play and can play in this evolution. And I mean, we've worked on psychological safety, most of us, for many, many years. I mean, with the idea of, anybody should have the right to shut down a machine. Well, that depends whether the work environment is such that it allows them to do that, or whether that person would be ridiculed, or whether the boss would think it was, no, you can't do that because we're going to lose productivity, which was maybe the case many, many, many years ago. Also, many of us work on ergonomics, etc. And this, as a real ergonomics as a subject, has a real impact on Great Place to Work and making life easier, reducing workload, even work pace in some areas as well. That can also have an impact on our mental health and the stress that we feel at work. And then we have COVID. When COVID came, and a lot of people thought that now it threw psychological safety, mental health into the forefront. I actually believe all that it did was accelerate the pace at which psychological safety and which mental health became more and more important. According to recent information published by the ILO, approximately there was an increase of about 25% in mental health cases due to the COVID pandemic. And we just can't turn a blind eye. And that's why conferences like this are geared at spreading the word so that you can start to realize and understand what is the extent that mental health and psychological safety is part of what we do. Like I said before, I'm still on a journey. If you'd have spoken to my good friend Kathy Seabrook about 3 years ago, I would have said, well, mental health, okay, we can do a little bit. We can help people identify low-level signals, but it's HR. 3 years later, I have a totally different viewpoint. And like I said before on psychological safety, I truly believe it's all about business culture, but that we have an aspect to contribute. We can't ignore that either. In this new world, we need to be much more visible leaders. Not just experts, but visible leaders when it comes to talking about inclusiveness, psychological safety, mental health. We also need, I believe, to be as inclusive as the people that we want to protect and that we want to serve. And this, as you could probably imagine, is an excellent segue to our opening keynote speech from Dr. David Daniels, who, as Melissa said, will talk about inclusive leadership for inclusive change. Now, I looked at the bio of David, and it's pages and pages and pages. So just to give you a little bit of a flash about David and what he does and where he's coming from. So David lives in Atlanta, which is, as you all know, is in the United States. He's an occupational health and safety professional, and he's a former public safety executive. He's the current president and CEO of ID2 Solutions, who have a focus in psychosocial hazard mitigation strategies for organizations. He has a bachelor's degree in fire services administration, and amongst many other qualifications, he is a violence prevention specialist and is a certified mental health first aider. Within the US National Safety Council, or the NSC, he's on the board of directors, and he is a member of the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Committee. As I said, his list of achievements and his services that he gives to occupational health and safety is extensive, and I couldn't go through them all today, but I would invite you all to connect with him and connect with each other, actually, but connect with David on LinkedIn. Is definitely worth knowing and definitely worth following. So David, now that you've appeared on the screen, I just want to apologize if I've missed anything important, but I will let you add that if you think there is anything to add. But it's a great pleasure to have you with us today, and I'm really looking forward to your keynote. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Malcolm, first of all, for the gracious introduction. Thank you for sharing a bit about what OneWISH is, what it's about, where it came from. I think that's important. I think the conversation that we're going to have today is very important. And I'm going to make a little switch here to make sure that you can see a few slides I put up. But before I do that, I want to thank a friend of mine who helped make the connection, and she's probably on. So Amy Russo lives in Iowa here in the United States and is very, very active around issues of equity for women from a safety perspective. And it is not surprising that she would be a part of your executive committee, and that she would be a part of trying to help this entire industry be more reflective of not only the people who have ideas, have expertise, and have the ability to make a difference, but also are reflective of a community that often gets injured. So I'll say that as a general statement. While our occupations in terms of leadership and in terms of oversight may be homogeneous, the population of people who get injured across this world is extremely diverse. Extremely diverse. As a matter of fact, the data suggests that it's not only extremely diverse, it's fairly unequal, that injuries and illnesses and fatalities generally occur greater in the population of women and people of color around the world than not. So again, I'm just very excited to have the opportunity to be able to share. And let me, I'll make this switch over, and there we go. So again, I thought it was very interesting to find out that OneWISH even existed, and some of the words that are used to describe OneWISH, I think, are important. A global coalition of networks for women and inclusion. So I didn't interpret this as a thing just for women. It is a thing for women and inclusion, which gives me the opportunity to participate. and I've shared this with others. So I'm a proud son and husband and brother and father of daughters and grandfather of granddaughters. And I consider myself to be not just an ally of women, but an accomplice. I think there's a difference. There are a lot of folks out there who say, oh, yes, we're an ally of women or people of color or the disabled or whoever the group that I'm not really I wasn't born a part of or don't necessarily share a real similarity with. But there's a difference between an accomplice and an ally. So the allies, so let's say that you decided that you want to take on the hat of Robin Hood and go out and rob, get from the rich and distribute to the poor. And you'd have a lot of folks who would be allies of that. Yes, I agree that the system has hurt many people and we need to go out and get those resources and redistribute them to the people who actually need them. So the allies would be the ones waving at you as you're going off to do the work. The accomplice gets in the chariot, gets in the vehicle with you, and is actually going to go out and put themselves at risk to the extent necessary to get this done. And I want to believe that, or at least to try to be one of those folks who will not just support women, but will try to get in there and get involved, but not take over and not bring my own challenges into that environment. So again, just appreciate the opportunity to be able to share. I'm going to chat a little bit about inclusive leadership for inclusive culture. As a matter of fact, I had a guest on my podcast here recently, the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast, and they were sharing that you get the culture that you deserve. You get the culture that you lead. You get the culture that you accept. And while all of the culture is not about the leader, it certainly starts with leadership. And so let's chat a little bit about at least what I believe to be part of the challenge is exclusion. We wouldn't have to have an issue or a discussion about inclusion if we all felt included. And I can share with you that there are many occasions where people don't feel included. And it's interesting because if you looked across the world, and in this case, in terms of race and ethnicity, across the world, there are legitimate prohibitions in place in terms of hiring and recruiting based on race and ethnicity. This is not we've gotten better as a planet, as a species. We've certainly gotten better than the days when folks who looked like myself were traded as property. And unfortunately, there are some occasions where that occurs, but it's a lot less than it once was. It used to be the global economy was driven by, the exchange of human beings, but things have changed. So we have rules and regulations and policies and things to protect equal opportunity and so again, as a species, we say that discrimination and hiring of people based on their race, on their gender, on their ethnic background, we say that that's prohibited. And in many cases, it actually is. But there's a difference between the concept of exclusion and the concept of ostracism. So we're going to talk a little bit about the definitions are slightly different. To exclude me is to bar me, to keep me out, to lock the door, to say that I can't participate, to put the sign up that says, you are not welcome here. The signs that you would see, again, in my country 50 or 60 years ago, where the sign would say that I was excluded. But the signs have come down. But what in some cases has taken its place is a system. So to ostracize is to exclude a person not by a sign, but by not communicating with them, by refusing to acknowledge their presence, by refusing to associate with them. So you can be a member of the group, club, association, business, but we won't do lunch with you. We won't hang out with you on the weekends. We don't tell you about the thing that we did over the summer because you weren't really included. And that occurs interestingly, across lots and lots of organizations and things that we do that we actually say are open to everyone. We say it's open. We say you can participate until you actually try to participate. So Kipling Williams, who's a professor of psychological sciences at Purdue, he suggested that exclusion and ostracism actually feel like a form of bullying. Certainly my friends at the National Workplace Bullying Coalition and the Workplace Bullying Institute would all suggest to you that one of the ways that people bully others is by keeping them feeling like they're not a part, and doing that repeatedly, and doing that from a position of power. As a matter of fact, technically, the definition of bullying requires a person to be in a position of power to do something that is uncomfortable to the target, and to do that repeatedly. You have to have all three of those things to be bullying. Ostracism is an excellent way to get that done. It doesn't leave a bruise. It doesn't break a bone, doesn't show blood, but it causes people to feel as if they're not really a part. And interestingly, this actually can happen unintentionally. I tend to be a fairly positive person and want to assume the best out of people. And I believe that there are organizations, groups, associations, and individuals who are really, they want to be open. They really do want to have other people participate. But the issue is they don't really know how, and they never really have. It's the learned behavior of inclusion is difficult for some, and a lot of it comes from these unintentional causes. So by our focusing, so if you look, when we talk particularly in business and in organizations about the quantity of things we need to get done, sometimes we pile lots and lots of expectations on people, lots and lots of work on people that actually excludes them from the process, because it's not possible. It's not humanly possible for people to do the things sometimes we expect of them. Our conversations about quality, is it good? Is it fast? Is it cheap? Well, we can't have all three. And so, but there's often this discussion about having all of them at the same time, and it makes it very difficult for people to be their best and contribute their best to the process, because there's just so much to do, and there's this level of expectation that is actually unrealistic. And in both cases, these expectations tend to come from those in positions of authority and power and leadership. So let me cover with you, particularly those of you who are sitting here thinking, I really want to do better. And I'm in a position to be able to help. So are there areas where I'm unintentionally excluding or ostracizing others? Well, yeah, let me help you there. So there are what are called leadership ostracism behaviors. One of them is the fact that we have people who are in the room, but we are ignoring them. As a matter of fact, there's a concept I heard about some years ago, these what they called pseudo-participative gatherings, where we bring people into the room. So we bring women into the room. We bring people of color into the room. We bring young people into the room. We bring whoever. We bring these folks into the room, but we kind of ignore the fact that they're there. We've checked the box that we hired them and that we invited them to the meeting, but the decisions are really already made when they show up. And we absolutely ignore any contributions that these folks might have, undermining. So we hired that new, and I've certainly noticed this in the time since the murder of George Floyd. There were companies across the globe who pledged thousands and thousands, sometimes millions of dollars of money, and said, oh yeah, we're going to have a diversity coalition. We're going to hire people of color, and we're going to bring women in, and we're going to change. And now 2.5 years later, did we hire the chief diversity officer and are consistently undermining everything that we said we expected them to do? Do we engage in differential treatment? And again, there is a difference between equality and equity. Equality is getting the same thing. Equity is getting what I need to accomplish what it is I'm trying to achieve. And sometimes we end up with differential treatment that is not equitable in its distribution. One group gets this, the other group gets that. And then we turn around and say what that group got was either a benefit or a liability, when it's us who decided what they were going to get. Differential treatment can be a leadership ostracism behavior, neglect. oh yeah, that's Sally. She's been here for 20 years. Yeah, she does a great job over there with that group. She does a great job as a secretary. Oh, she makes great coffee, but oh yeah, I'm not really sure that she'd be the one we'd want to consider for the position as a vice president or for the CEO position or to contribute to that project because, oh yeah, she doesn't have what's necessary, even though if you were to look at her resume, it exceeds the resumes of many of the men who are in the room actually making the decision. And then there's just outright exclusion. And frankly, and again, I live here in the American South, that gets, honestly gets a bad rap sometimes because, at least in my country, there's all this talk about, oh, in the South, how they treat people. And I'm originally from the Pacific Northwest, the Seattle area, as a matter of fact. And I can tell you that there have been occasions where I felt the same kind of behavior, not only there in other places in the country. It wasn't in the South. I felt excluded, but people wouldn't just say it. Their actions made me feel excluded, but they were smiling the entire time. So honestly, there are some, and I may be unique this way, but I would rather people be honest about those that I want to exclude. See, the reality is we can't include everyone in everything all the time because we don't have the capacity to do so. We don't. So why is it that we can't be more clear about, in this group, this is what we're trying to do? So I can't speak for OneWISH, but I don't think OneWISH is actually, it doesn't exist so people can be better bakers and cooks because it's about occupational safety and health. That's not that it's not, we don't need to have inclusion in the culinary industry, but that's not what this group is about. So again, I don't certainly want to speak for them, but I think it's important that we be clear about what we include and exclude, because again, we can't be all things to all people, but we should be the things that we say we're going to be to other people. So let's shift a little bit of our conversation to inclusion in safety and health. And I really appreciated Malcolm's comments and the fact that he was honest about the fact that if we were having this discussion 3, 4, 5 years ago, that he might not agree that inclusion and psychological health and safety that are necessarily, safety related things. One thing he didn't mention on the bio is that my master's degree is in human resource management. And I did that intentionally because at the time, I figured out that as a leader, there were 2 things that I could do to really wreck the system or the organization I was with at the time. I can mishandle the money or mistreat the people. And I found that mishandling money is actually much more difficult to do because there's lots of rules and regulations on how you report. And so folks are very concerned about their money, and they sometimes forget about how they can misuse people. But inclusion in safety and health is absolutely important because it actually is safety and health. So Dr. Amy Edmondson, who many of you have probably heard of before 1999, did some research. So she's a professor of leadership and management actually at Harvard. And this concept that gets tossed about psychological safety is a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So again, she approaches this from a leadership and management and team orientation perspective. It is a critical and really important concept. You can't expect to get innovation and creativity and the best ideas and the new products and the new customers when folks don't feel safe to try something new, to bring up a new idea, to do something that hasn't been done before. Everything was impossible the day before it was actually done by somebody. So again, that concept of psychological safety that we discuss so often is not technically a safety concept, but a leadership concept. Dr. Timothy Clark, a couple of years ago, wrote a book called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. He takes Dr. Edmondson's concept and talks about it in a slightly different way and suggests that there are stages. So you can have psychological safety at stages. And his perspective is that of a social scientist. So how, from the people perspective, how do you cause this psychological safety thing to actually manifest in the organization or the group that you're a part of? And again, there are these 4 stages. And I'll talk about those stages here in just a second, but the first stage is about inclusion. So what is inclusion? Inclusion is the action or state of including. It's the practice or policy of providing equal access and opportunities and resources to people who might have been excluded or marginalized before. And so when Dr. Clark talks about psychological safety in these 4 stages, he looks at it in these 4 different ways. And it starts with inclusion. I can't feel safe if I'm not included at all. Exclusion does not feel good. Having been excluded from lots of things over the course of my life, I can tell you it doesn't feel good to be excluded. We, as human beings, have this need to be around other people. As a matter of fact, as a society across the globe, one of the things that we do to people that we want to punish for their crimes against humanity is separate them from other people. That's what jail and prison is about. And what's even worse in prison is when you put a person into solitary confinement. As a matter of fact, people can actually lose their minds, lose their emotional grip on society and on reality when they're excluded from other people. So exclusion is it's really hurtful. So in order to help people feel safe, the first thing we have to do is include them. Inclusion then leads to the possibility of learning, to the possibility of contributing, and ultimately the possibility of actually being able to challenge. And I find that this is a difficult thing for some, because you'll let me be a part of the system. And I found that there are organizations and groups, they're interested in looking different as long as you don't challenge anything. But if there is not a challenge, then the system doesn't develop, it doesn't get better, it doesn't grow, it doesn't mature if we continue to do the same things that got us in the situation we were in before. So my research conducted now, I guess about a year and a half or so ago, my doctoral dissertation was, it was a qualitative study on, and the title of my dissertation was The Lived Experience of Black Workers' Exposure to Psychosocial Hazards in the American Workplace. I could have done the research on any group of people, but I chose this hermeneutic phenomenological approach that allows the researcher to actually understand a little bit about what they're researching before they get into it and not assume that they don't have a connection to it. I could have done the research with any group of women, of young people, of older people, of people who speak different languages. And what happens is we are exposed to these psychosocial hazards. And my definition of a psychosocial hazard is unique. It is a psychosocial hazard is a psychosocial factor that is perceived or experienced as unfavorable and can cause damage in the mind of the individual exposed. And that in turn influences their behavior. So a psychosocial hazard, my definition, is about the individual, their perception, their experience, how they see it as unfavorable, and how that perception or experience affects how they behave. Psycho, how you think. Social, how you interact with others. So let's talk a little bit about how the concept of psychological safety, psychosocial hazard mitigation, how they connect in an inclusive leadership model. So inclusive leadership is there are many, many, many forms of leadership out there. Lots of authors and scholars and lots of folks who practice different ways of leading. And quite simply, my description of leadership is, if you say you are a leader and there is no one following you, you are actually out for a walk. So the evidence of your leadership are folks that are following. And that followership can occur at different levels. They can be at the same level as you. They can be slightly behind you. They can even be slightly ahead of you. But we're kind of moving in a similar direction. And the question is whether or not that leadership is inclusive. So again, the concept first manifested in about 2006 as words and deeds by a leader or leaders that indicate an invitation and appreciation for others' contributions. So that leader that invites others to participate in the leadership of the organization, group, company, whatever it might be. And those leaders also exhibit this inclusive way of being. It's just who they are. They're accessible. They're available for interactions with the folks that are following. As a matter of fact, there's a book out there that I recently read, and I recommend to others. It's written by Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective, his son, actually. Stephen Covey's son wrote a book, Stephen M.R. Covey wrote a book called Trust and Inspire. And in the book, he talks about the fact that the old command and control style of leadership doesn't work anymore. It doesn't function in an environment where people can get information at their fingertips. So they don't need leaders to micromanage, to be in every single detail. They can figure out how to do it. What they need is, what are we trying to do and when do we need to do it? Not how. Not how. And it's important that leaders be confident enough in their own abilities and skills to be able to be inclusive leaders and not feel threatened by people in their organizations who are actually smarter than them, more capable than them. I can tell you my youngest granddaughter is 4 and she's smarter than me. She can do things at 4 that I was only able to do a couple of years ago. And she's a part of a generation. They are smarter than we are because they have access to more information than we did, and they have it at their fingertips. Digital natives. How do we create an environment that is inclusive to them? More recently, this concept focused on supporting employees as groups to ensure justice and equity. So the discussion we've been having, again, as we've emerged from the pandemic around inclusion and diversity and equity and belonging, these concepts have always been present, but similar. I feel similar to the way Malcolm described it, and the way I would say it's even slightly different. I don't believe that the pandemic changed a lot of anything. It exposed a lot of everything. These issues were here before the pandemic. We were having challenges around inclusion before the pandemic. We're having challenges around psychological safety before the pandemic. What the pandemic forced us to do is to pay attention to it because we could not run from it, because we were stuck at home. We were in some cases stuck with people that we hadn't even conversed with before, hadn't paid a lot of attention to, but it forced us to really pay attention. So what are some of the attributes of an inclusive leader for those of you who are sitting and thinking, that sounds like something I'd be interested in. That sounds like something I really want to do. So how do I do that? So there are 9 leadership attributes. One of them is commitment. You have to be committed enough to inclusive leadership because you're going to be the oddball in a lot of organizations. It's easy to say, I'm including people until things don't go the way folks expect them to go. Then we kind of back off of that commitment. Well, yeah, we'll bring in women and people of color. And as a matter of fact, we'll bring in the older white guy. And yeah, we'll give him. But when things don't go so well, it's kind of like in professional sports when certain coaches get the job and they don't win, they have 2 or 3 years and they're out, and others can stay year after year after year. How committed are you to inclusive leadership when things don't go the way that some expect them to go? Self-awareness is really important. It's important to be aware that if I want to be an inclusive leader, I have to be aware that I don't know everything. I'm not perfect. I make decisions that don't turn out the way that I expected them to turn out. So it's being aware of my own limitations. And then not superimposing my limitations on other people because they may not have that limitation. But it's, again, just being aware. Humility, the ability to be able to recognize that, again, I don't know everything and I'll say it. And I'm okay if someone else takes the point on this particular topic. I don't have to be the center of attention all the time. As a matter of fact, inclusive leaders are rarely the center of attention. They want to cause things to happen and not necessarily make things happen or necessarily be in the middle of it, but cause it to happen. And that's how they know they've done a great job. They have to be curious. So that leader who is always out in front, pointing on the direction that they need to go, and they don't ever really stop to go, well, what if we went over there? What do you think about going over there and trying this? Some of the world's greatest minds are curious and open to change and open to difference. Collaboration is absolutely important in inclusive leadership. Because again, I can't do it all myself. I need people around me. I need groups around me. I have found that there is no single solitary person on the planet who can meet every need that I have, not even me. So it's important that I work with other people. And that caused me to be in different groups for different things. But I won't get anything out of it if I can't collaborate with the group, and which means I may have to change a little bit myself. Cultural intelligence. There was a book that was written a while back called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands, and talks about the fact that when we are doing, particularly, this is actually written for business, but when you're interacting with cultures that are different from your own, it is important that we have a level of intelligence about the folks that we're interacting with. I may not know everything, but realize that they do things slightly different from me. And please hear this. Difference is not the same as deficiency. And often we look at different cultures and, well, they do this way and we would do it. It just means it's different. It does not mean it is less than what it is we are trying to do. Empathy. I find that particularly in the times that we live where people are hyper-focused on their own goals and what it is they're trying to achieve, that sometimes we miss out on empathy. And it is important, particularly from a health and safety perspective. One cannot be effective in the health and safety space and not have empathy for other people. Fairness. Fairness, and again, to include means that we include in fair ways, that everyone gets a shot and gets an opportunity. And again, everything is not for everyone, but people ought to have the opportunity to find that out for themselves and to understand that for themselves. And ultimately, courage. It takes courage to be an inclusive leader. It is easy to be the yeller, the screamer, the powerful, this is what that's traditional. That's stereotypical. It takes courage to be the person that people will say, well, they're a little soft-spoken. They seem to focus a lot on the soft skills. And yes, that's okay. The question is whether or not leadership is actually occurring in that system. So as I start to conclude, we're going to open this up for some questions and some discussion. It looks like we have some discussion going on. I'm not in the chat in details, but I do see it in the bubble. So let's talk a little bit about how leadership affects culture. Leadership does affect culture. So culture is a way of life, especially the general customs and beliefs of a particular group. It's the characteristics that we bring to everything we do, our language, the food that we eat, our habits, the music, our art. And we all bring this sense of culture with us when we get into a group with other people. That's whether it be professional, whether it be the things we enjoy for entertainment, the folks we hang out with on the weekend. All those are a part of our culture, and we are often and we are generally a part of multiple cultures. Safety culture, and this is the concept of safety culture was actually first came up when the investigation around the 1986 Chernobyl accident occurred. It's one of the first times that there was this discussion about safety culture, but the reality is safety culture should not be separate from the culture at large. It is a component of the culture, but it involves that part of the culture that focuses on safety and the extent to which people take personal responsibility and that safety is a personal thing. Safety always begins with individuals. It is not something that starts with a group. It starts with an individual, and then it spreads to the group. And often the focus on safety, the extent to which it is a part of the culture of the organization, it depends on how much it is a part of the culture of the leader. Because you can say that you're about safety. You can say, oh, yes, safety is our number one priority. And the reality is, in most organizations, not necessarily so. There are organizations that were created for a safety purpose, but many exist for a profit motive. Others exist for some sort of bringing people together, some sort of social benefit. But safety can and should be a part of all these other goals. As a matter of fact, I can assure you, the safer you are, the more money you can make. Inclusion can actually become a part of the culture, because sometimes what happens is, again, as we talked about before, because of how we have been socialized in the organizations we've been a part of, the people we've been around, the things we've heard, the experiences that we've been through, we can, again, unconsciously exclude people. And so that becomes the culture. But you can also consciously include people. Inclusion can actually become a part of the culture of the group, of the organization, of the company, such that it is a part of everything that we do. So every place you go, you see inclusion. You see racial and functional and tenure diversity. You see organizational performance. And again, there is lots and lots of data out there to suggest that more diverse groups, more diverse organizations, they are more creative, they're more effective, and they produce at a higher clip, faster. They do things better than homogeneous groups. Now, again, I want to be clear. It's not that the people are better or worse. It's not that the people are good or bad. It is that the system itself produces better and closer to the standard when it has diverse thoughts and different ways of looking at the challenges that are in front of the organization and the opportunities that are in front of the group. So inclusive leadership, to be an inclusive leader, actually requires that you have both psychological safety and the ability to mitigate psychosocial hazards. You will not, I should say, be effective with a focus on psychological safety that does not pay attention to the psychosocial hazards that you're exposing people in that organization to, or in that group to. You can say all you want, oh yeah, our group is open and people can take challenges. And again, it was brought up earlier that we have lots of policies around stop work authority and identifying hazards when you see them. But most of those descriptions are around biological, chemical, ergonomic, safety, physical. They're around those hazards. They are rarely around psychosocial hazards. And this is an area where, again, as I talk about it in the podcast, is where here in the United States, we have some work to do, but there are countries around the world, 30 of them, again, last count, that have policies in place. Now, again, what I'm finding, they're not perfect, but they identify psychosocial hazards as a hazard. And this is where the involvement of the health and safety professionals in an organization becomes so important, because those of us who have been or who focus on occupational health and safety, we know a hazard when we see one. And so what I'm suggesting is that psychosocial hazards are simply another hazard. But again, I also am finding that organizations who are not in manufacturing, they're not in construction, and haven't really paid a lot of attention to that occupational safety and health stuff, their occupational safety and health systems are sometimes somewhat lacking because they aren't exposed to the hazard. So we have to make sure that we have a foundation there once we bring in the conversation about psychosocial hazards. And both of those, so a focus on psychosocial hazard mitigation and psychological safety can create an inclusive culture because they remove the barriers that are keeping people out. They remove the obstacles that are causing people to leave. And so it is important that we be able to focus on both. And who should be focusing on both? We all should be focusing on both. But specifically, to make this work, we really need to have focus from our people leaders, whether that be a supervisor, a president, a manager, whatever position that we give the responsibility of leading other people, they have to be focused on all of these things. We need involvement from our health and safety professionals to make this work, because again, they are the folks in the organization, whether they be internal, whether they be contracted. These are the folks that have the expertise to understand what a hazard looks like and how to mitigate a hazard. We also need assistance and help from our human resource folks. It is important. So again, this is not suggesting that any one of these folks should be the lead. It doesn't matter who the leader is. It can be a lead from anyone, depending on how your organization is set up. But they all need to be involved in this discussion. And we're also going to need for this particular hazard, we're going to need the involvement of mental health professionals. As Malcolm talked about, there are many, many, many people around the world who do have existing mental illness and mental health conditions that they bring to work with them. So when we say this, we are psychologically safe and we want you to bring your whole self, some people are going to bring emotional and mental challenges from outside the workplace. We can't exclude that challenge, just like we would not exclude them for having high blood pressure or for being a diabetic. They can do the work, but there are things emotionally and mentally and psychologically that they are just dealing with. And we have a regulation here in the United States called the Americans with Disability Act that actually makes it illegal for you to exclude people from the workplace if they can perform the bona fide occupational qualifications of the job with a accommodation. So exclusion is, again, frankly, illegal. So all of these folks, people leaders, health and safety professionals, HR managers and professionals, and mental health professionals, they are the key to making this thing work. But it starts with someone at the top on that people leader side with a focus on inclusive leadership. So this is intended to be kind of a keynote, and I'm not much of a speech giver. I really enjoy the opportunity to interact with the groups that I am sharing information with. And so I'm going to go off share here. Before I do that, I want to do a quick shameless plug for the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast and for my organization, should you need help down the line. But I'm going to stop sharing. And I believe that I think Melissa or Malcolm are going to get back on, and we're going to have a little bit of discussion with those of you who've taken time to hang out with us. I want to be able to answer some of your questions and get into a little bit of dialogue with you. So Melissa, back to you.
Good. Thank you. Are you hearing me?
I am.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Daniels. That was really great. So thanks so much again for, coming on and giving those insights. There's a couple of items on the chart and then one or two questions. But I know I shared this before, but I like sharing this because I think it emphasizes a couple of points. One, I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn. And historically people thought and even myself, LinkedIn, you were only on LinkedIn when you were looking for a job. LinkedIn has so many great resources. Why do I talk about LinkedIn? Is that as we were planning for this event, I wanted to reach out to Dr. Daniels on LinkedIn because I had heard him on the Psych Health and Safety podcast. And I hesitated a bit. Normally, I'm really brave. I'll just reach out, send a message and so on. And I've done it to many people. But this time I said, okay, I'll hold on for a day or two. And then we were speaking with Amy Rosa, who you mentioned. And Amy suggested Dr. Daniels for, to be a great presenter. And she was not wrong. So when she said the name, I was like, oh my gosh, I know that's a person I wanted to reach out to. And so the second point is the value of connections. And you said something about collaboration. And so I'm a true believer of that as well. So, and it ties in well to what you said about information and access to information. Things are available online. We have access to LinkedIn so that we can connect. And, now the global has become smaller in that we have access to, resources and experts and insights and discussions and so on, which I absolutely love to make all of the workplaces better. So I just wanted to share that story from a couple of points of view.
Yeah, so. And I think that's absolutely important. And it goes back to this conversation that we're having about leadership, is there are leaders out there who don't seem to recognize that. They don't recognize that, look, if you are an obstacle to me getting the information that I need, because there are people who used to say knowledge is power. Well, it is, but I can get it on my phone. So you can't really hide it from me. As a matter of fact, I can probably find someone who knows more about it than you do. And this is why being an inclusive leader is so important. You're not that important anymore. You're not. It's really more important for us to be able to connect. And again, I can connect with people across the world in seconds. So we need a different kind of leadership that recognizes that encourages that, because if you become an obstacle to people who want to do that, folks will leave and they'll go to the places that are more open.
Yeah, no, agree. So good. So Pam Walaski, I may have butchered her last name. I do apologize, Pam. Asked a question in the chat about you showed the 9 inclusive leadership attributes. Where was the source of that? Of those 9?
It's actually, I can provide it for you. I can provide. I actually did look it up. So actually there are a couple of sources. There is one source that suggests there are 6. The other suggests that there are 9. And again, to be quite honest, I did the Google search, looked for a paper, and the paper suggested there are 9. But I can provide that link for anyone who wants to look it up.
Okay, great. No, thank you. And I did share your LinkedIn link in the chat, as well as your email address. Hopefully that was
Sure.
okay. I think it's on your LinkedIn bio. I have a question, and then I'll bring a couple of comments on from the chat. So I'm curious about your view on unconscious bias training. So a few years ago that was the in thing. So you've talked about yeah. I'm curious about your views on that. I wouldn't say more.
So, so first of all, we all have biases. We all have biases. And here's the other thing too. And I just put the link to that previous question in the chat. I think we've made this more complicated than it needs to be, because first of all, discrimination is not illegal. We discriminate all the time. We do. It's illegal discrimination that's illegal. It's not legal to discriminate in workplaces based on these characteristics, but there are things that I do and there are only people in my family involved. There are things that I do and they're just men, or we do that all the time. And so first of all, we should all accept that we all have biases. And the challenge is when we bring those biases to a work setting or to a setting where we're trying to achieve something, and we exclude people that don't see things the same way that we do. So a lot of it is unconscious. So we all have these unconscious biases because that's the way humans function. We do things that help us feel safe, help us feel good, but they don't necessarily work for other people. And so, and we could spend all day talking about them and all that type of thing, but it's actually much simpler than that. It is have an environment where people that you say you want included actually are. That's it. And when the person says, I don't feel included, believe them. When the person says, I don't feel safe, believe them. Don't try to convince them. Don't try to convince them that they're wrong. I'm never wrong about my feelings. I'm not wrong about that. They may be different from the way, but I'm not wrong about that. They may be inconsistent with what the organization wants to do, but they're mine. And so I think it's important that we recognize we all have biases. And it's not bad to have biases. It's bad to have a bias in a situation where we say we want to include people, and that bias causes us not to be able to achieve the very thing we said we were trying to achieve.
Okay. No, thank you for that. Eliza Cooper said in the chat, Australia is one country to look at when it comes to regulations and legislation in psychosocial risk management and mitigation. So on Wednesday, we're actually having a panel discussion with Joelle, who is from Australia.
Yes.
And, the Psych Health and Safety podcast, the Australia version, they've talked a lot about some of the work that's happening in Australia. So do join us there for that discussion. It's great to have Joelle there. We'll have Peter Kelly, who will give the UK perspective, and then Louise will give Louise's perspective from her global.
You're getting the band back together because so Joelle and and Peter, it's the same cast of characters because these are the folks that are actually behind the USA podcast. So the USA podcast is sponsored by folks from Australia. That's where, because frankly, the US, we're still trying to get there. we're still trying to get there. But that's, that's okay. It's another example of how folks have reached out across the world, trying to help each other, trying to share with each other. And I absolutely agree that the folks down in Australia are doing great work. Now, again, what I will share with you, my observation, they're not perfect either. None of us are perfect. So you could have all of the policies that you want in place. The question is, how is it working for the person at the sharp end of the pencil? So we all have work to do. We all have areas where we can help one another, whether there are policies or not. And the reality is, why should we need policies to treat each other fairly? Well, sometimes we do. And if we do, thank God we have them. People do things safely for one of three reasons. A, because they have this ethical and moral drive to do what's right. Secondly, because they think it's going to save them a buck. Really, it's going to save them money. And the third reason is because they have to. And frankly, as a safety professional, I'm good with either one, whichever one works, as long as it creates a safe environment for people.
Great. No, thanks. And yeah, and you did mention your health and safety podcast. So do you want to say a little bit more about it, like some of the topics you cover? I know it's fairly new, maybe 3 months old.
Yeah, we've actually been on air since the first part of July. And again, we're part of the family of, I call them the family of podcasts out there around the world, again, sponsored by my friends at Flourish DX down in Australia. And there is, again, one in Australia, one in Singapore, Canada, the US, and certainly affiliation with a podcast in the UK. And again, the podcast in the US is different from the others, though. And it's different for a couple of reasons. One is the fact that we don't have regulations in place. We don't have policies in place. We have some standards that some folks use, but it's that whole, US independence thing. So I often, I tend to bring people on for not only their expertise, but for their lived experience and their research as well. And I'm finding that there are lots of folks around the US who are having conversation about this topic. And it's continuing to increase, particularly those who are paying attention to what's going on in the rest of the world. We recently had the Surgeon General make an important statement around the importance of mental health. And we have, so there are things going on here in the US, but I'm trying to lend my voice and lend my perspective to, as a safety professional as well. And that's the other thing that's a little bit different about this. I'm a safety professional. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a counselor, a therapist. I'm a safety guy. So everything that I talk about it from a safety perspective. So I invite others to, every Friday, we have a new episode. There's one coming out this Friday. As a matter of fact, this Friday, we'll actually be having a special episode with 2 veterans for Veterans Day.
Okay. No, thanks. Yeah, I highly recommend listening to those podcasts. Louise asked a question. And actually, before I go into Louise's question, just a reminder, if you have any questions or comments, you can pop it on the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and come off mic. But Louise asks, we use the terms psychological safety and psychosocial safety regularly. What is the difference, if there is one? So psychological safety and psychosocial safety.
So they are actually related, but different terms. And again, I talked about that a little bit in the presentation. So psychological safety is the Edmondson concept around an environment where people feel free to bring their whole self to the discussion without fear of retaliation or what have you. That is a leadership management focused concept because that's Dr. Edmondson's expertise. Psychosocial hazards that's a safety related distinction. And again, certainly in the US and in many other countries, we have, again, these 6 hazards: biological, chemical, ergonomic, physical, and safety hazards. And I'm suggesting that we include here in the US and other places a 6th hazard, psychosocial hazards, or again, a hazard that is perceived or experienced by the person. And again, you're going to have a great panel to talk about ISO 45003. That standard has identified 88 psychosocial hazards that are specifically listed. And again, that's not, you could probably find something else that's not on the list, but those are the ones that are identified in the standard itself. But again, my definition is much broader. It is perception or experience of the person. So again, psychological safety is about the environment. Psychosocial hazards are hazards in the environment that affect how safe people feel and how included people feel and how willing they are to bring their whole self to that environment. So that's, again, they're related. And I would argue that you cannot have one without the other. You cannot have psychological safety without psychosocial hazard mitigation. You cannot. It'll start off cute. It'll be great today. But eventually, the psychosocial hazard exposure that people have, whether it be from work, from home, from school, because there is no environment where you can eliminate all psychosocial hazards. It's not possible.
Oh, no, thank you so much for that. So last call for any questions or so before we close off. So while I wait for that, I did like your slide where you showed the roles of, the different roles the different professionals play. So EHS, HR, leaders, mental health, and so on. Because I think there is varying views on like the role of health and safety professionals in this space. So, a lot of the people who will be attending our event are health and safety professionals, even myself. Maybe you want to elaborate a bit more around the health and safety professional role?
So again, I think it's really, so let's look at this from another hazard. I mentioned that I spent a lot of years in the fire rescue service. As a matter of fact, 32 years in 4 organizations in 3 states here in the US. Have met folks from all over the world. And I can tell you that any place on the planet, when you heat H2O to 212 degrees Fahrenheit, I don't know what that is Celsius, when you heat above 212 degrees Fahrenheit, water will turn into steam, period. So the potential for being burned by the steam is the same no matter where you are on the planet. This hazard is different. This hazard, it depends on the person. And so again, bringing that understanding of how identification of a hazard, assessment of the severity and vulnerability of that hazard to the person, and how we mitigate it, that's something that safety professionals do every single day. So this particular hazard, as a matter of fact, you could go into a manufacturing facility and have a chemical hazard. I know it's a chemical hazard because I'm trained in hazard communication, and I know something about the globally harmonized system of identifying chemicals. But I don't know much about that chemical. So what would I do? I would get a chemist to help me figure out the details. It's the same here when we're talking about psychosocial hazards. Many psychosocial hazards, chronic exposure or even acute exposure to psychosocial hazards can result in a mental injury or it actually can cause mental health challenges long-term, even mental illness. So that's why, and when we're having this conversation, I want to bring mental health professionals into the conversation. It's because safety folks don't know everything. We just don't. We can't know everything, but we know it's a hazard because the person, first of all, in many cases said it was a hazard. That's a case where the qualitative data is sometimes more important, because I would argue that psychosocial hazards are tremendously underreported and under-discussed around the globe because we've normalized bullying and harassment and microaggressions. We've normalized the behaviors. That's not a hazard. Well, yeah, it is. To me, it is. To you, it might be. So it's important that we shift that mindset. But that's why all 4 of those folks are so important. Leaders, HR folks, health and safety folks, and mental health professionals. If that system is going to work, if we're going to address psychosocial hazards, we have to have all 4 of them at the table.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Just looking at someone's comments. So thank you so much, Dr. Daniels, for your time. We really appreciate you being part of the OneWISH family now. So yes. We hope you continue to follow us on LinkedIn. We'll follow you as well. And, we look forward to you being involved in future events.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I plan to do that. Matter of fact, I have some ideas that I'm going to share with you all. Yeah, because, and as I really want to, thank you all for the invitation. And again, shout out to my friend Amy for making the connection. This isn't going to work from a safety perspective. Safety doesn't work when it's only safe for some people. We have to whoever it is we say we're trying to keep safe. We have to have them involved and included in the discussions about what safety is, because safety to you and me, it may be slightly different. And so I really appreciate what you all have done and what you continue to do to bring. I mean, half the world's population, probably slightly more of the world's population are women, and a bunch of guys will not be able to figure this out by ourselves. And so, and again, I'm really excited about what you're all doing, and thanks for the invitation.
Oh, thank you. I see Malcolm has come on. So I don't know if Malcolm wanted to say anything, but I also want to just remind people of the events we have tomorrow. So Malcolm, you want to say anything?
No, I just wanted to be here to say thank you very much to everybody, etc., and just wave to say bye-bye. So just wanted to be friendly. So go for it,
yeah,
Melissa.
Thanks. No, thanks so much. So yeah, so tomorrow, so this is the end of today. And tomorrow, as I mentioned, 2 p.m. UK time, we will be having a fireside chat with Lame Verre, who is a co-founder of Lean In Equity and Sustainability. So we'll hear a bit more about her group and actually collaboration opportunities with OneWISH, but what they've been doing. And also, she'll be speaking about a report that Powerful Woman issued out. So don't want to spoil it, but I think it's really good. And the beauty of it is that the report, though it was for the energy sector, it applies to all industries, one way or the other. And then at 4 p.m., we will have Rosa Carrillo, who will be talking about stress factors in safety and inclusion. So really great conversations tomorrow. So we look forward to having everyone there. And yeah, if nothing else, thanks very much for joining, everyone, and look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Thanks.
Stay safe.
Thanks.